once again. In fact, if you've been here the last few Sundays, we're going to be in chapter 5 again. And a couple of weeks ago, we started something that has a name. You know, a lot of what happens in Jesus' life are named by either sometimes they're just little subtitles in our book or in our Bible, our Gospels. Sometimes they're more theological. And as you know, we started a whole section in Matthew from chapters 5 all the way through chapter 7 that we are commonly called the Sermon on the Mount. And that's where we are. We're right in the middle of it, right at the beginning of it today. And I'm telling you this because if you have your Bibles, I invite you to turn to Matthew chapter 5, and we're going to start reading about 21, I think. But I want to do something a little differently, because what normally happens, what you know, is that I read the good news from either Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, and then we unpack it. But today I think we need to do a little unpacking before we read. Now, last couple of Sundays, as I said, we started this thing called the Sermon on the Mount. And you know, I found it fascinating. A couple of years ago, I think I was preparing for another sermon on the Sermon on the Mount. And I was looking up something, and I found out that back then, anyway, a couple of years ago, the average attention span for adults, us, was just over 7 minutes. In other words, as an adult, we can pay attention pretty well for something for 7 minutes. And I thought, well, you know, that's interesting, because I preached for longer than 7 minutes, and that was not made me feel very good. And so what I did is I looked at the Sermon on the Mount, and I said, well, I wonder if Jesus knew the same thing. I sat and I read the Sermon on the Mount out loud as if I was preaching that sermon, and it came in just under 7 minutes. See, Jesus knew, but I can't go through what we need to go through all at once. We need to look at what Jesus is teaching us in the Sermon on the Mount, not piece by piece, but there are whole sections that need our attention. For instance, we had the beginnings of it a couple of Sundays ago when we read the Beatitudes. These are the blessed are these, blessed are those. And what we found out was these are the behavior traits of the actions of someone who is blessed. And what that means is the actions and the behavior of people who bring joy to God, who make Him smile. Last Sunday, we really began the teaching part of it. And that's when I realized, in looking at our reading from chapter 5 today, we can't just give you another section and say, okay, this means this. Because we're going to see what it means. But he's teaching something bigger, something broader. Because we're entering into a section that he starts off. Now, he started last Sunday. He told us everything we needed to know. He said, I did not come to abolish the law. I came to fulfill it. And we knew by looking at that, and the reason I'm starting this way is because I need to make a correction. Because what we said was that the word law in our world basically means rules, code of conduct. But the Hebrew word for law, or Torah, literally means steps to achieve something. It is a directional thing. It is a journey. These laws take us somewhere. And that's why Jesus said he didn't come to get rid of those laws. He came to fulfill it, to become this image, to show us the destination, the steps on which we were heading. And the laws he was referring to were the 10 Commandments. And we talked about that last week, that the 10 Commandments can basically be broken up into 2 sections. The first 4, well, let me go back and tell you this. Jesus is going to simplify the 10 Commandments in chapter 25 of Matthew. And someone's going to ask him, well, what is the most important? What's the greatest commandment? Just give me one. Because let's face it, when we get to the law, that's really what we're talking about, right? What exactly do I have to do to stay out of trouble? Give me the minimum. And they came to him and said, just give us the number one thing, because we're going to screw it up. So just give me the one thing that I have to know. And he says, it's easy. You love God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. And then he says, and the second one is this. love your neighbor as yourself. And basically what he did is he simplified the 10 commandments. The first 4 commandments are all about how to love God. The next 6 commandments are all about how to love each other. And what we're looking at today is he's going to take those out and give us another image. Because like I said, I told you last Sunday that the law today is just rules. And the Torah are steps to achieve something. But in reality, they are the same. The law of any kind does the same thing. They paint a picture for us. And I realized this when I was thinking about when I was in the classroom. And for all you teachers and former teachers, what did you have to have on your wall the first day of school? The rules, right? And whatever rules you had in that classroom, we were taught in teacher school. You remember, make them positive and don't make too many of them. And so you always tried to have 3 or 4 that summed up everything you needed them to do for the whole school year. So for instance, be on time. Be on time. Bring the stuff you need to bring. Bring your book. Bring paper. Bring pencils. And various other levels of rules. And I realized we were doing the same things. Our rules in the classroom were steps to how to achieve, how to become the perfect student in my class. If you follow the rules I have, I'm painting a picture of what my best student looks like. And then I thought about, what about the traffic laws? Well, the traffic laws we live by today are the same. They paint a picture of the perfect driver. You don't speed, you don't double park, you don't roll through stop signs, you don't do all that. You actually are the right kind of driver, right? Even the other kind of laws we have about crime and murder and harming and stealing, all that is painting a perfect picture of what a perfect citizen looks like. So laws truly are the steps to achieve something. And that's what Jesus is telling us today. He is unpacking and painting for us a picture of what it means to be perfect in loving our neighbors as ourselves. Because we kind of think we know what that means, right? But we always want to add exceptions, don't we? We always want to say, well, I'll love you unless you lie to me. I'll love you unless you steal from me. I'll love you unless you hurt me. Because that's what I would do. But Jesus unpacks and begins to paint a picture of what it looks like. And he does it with about 5 or 6 things. And I don't want to read them all. Although it's the next several verses. We would be reading until verse 48 if I read them all. But basically he's doing the same thing for us in all of them. He's taking things that human beings are good at. Which is 1, being angry. 2, being lustful. 3, not keeping our word. 4, seeking revenge when someone harms us. And the last one is hating someone. Those are easy for human beings. I can do that without really trying. And he addresses all of those and tells us the same thing. It's the same lesson for all of them. And so I didn't want to read all of them, but I thought I'd read the one that I think comes in handy today. I saw a survey that was done in the year 2000, 17 years ago. Doesn't seem like 2000 was that long ago, does it? But it was. And that survey indicated that in America, people were more angry than ever before. There was more attitude, more insults, more discrediting, more yelling, more aggression, more rage than ever before. And they called it the Jerry Springer effect. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't think Jerry Springer's show's been all that popular the last few years. In fact, just a few years ago, I noticed it, but I referred to it more the WWE effect. The whole wrestling hit you over the head with a chair kind of thing. But I don't know. I'm even thinking that's outdated. Because if you watch the news today, it'd probably be better labeled as the Washington effect. We've got people yelling at their representatives in town hall meetings. We've got people criticizing and insulting grown men and women. They're doing all that in public, on the news. If it was added 2,000. I don't know what the survey is going to show today. And so I thought, if we're going to look at what Jesus tells us with the overall brushing effect of what we need to know about what humans are good at, I thought we'd better start with anger. And so I want you to join me now. If you want to read along with me, I'm going to read the section where Jesus, and it's the very first one. He begins talking about it. And what I told you, remember, he's going to unpack those last 6 commandments, not one by one, but on this one, he's going to pull one of the commandments right off the list. And he's going to tell us exactly how we need to look at that. All right, verse 21. I'm going to read through verse 26. Jesus said, "You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, 'You shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment.' But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, 'You fool,' you will be liable to the hell of fire. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on the way to court with him, or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown into prison. Truly I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny." Jesus points out to us something we all know, we can all agree on, right? We all know that murder is wrong. And basically what that is taking a human life out of anger. And he says, we all know that. That's in the Old Testament. That's on the 10 Commandment list. Thou shalt not murder. And he says, if you do, you'll be subject to judgment, meaning you'll have to answer for it. And then he goes on, because all of these things that he brings up, we know about. But he begins to raise the bar. He begins to make it a little bit more inclusive. He says, not only are you going to be subject to trial or judgment for murdering, if you get angry with someone, you're going to be subject to judgment. Now, he doesn't say we're going to hell because we're angry with somebody, because after all, we know anger happens. We get angry a lot. I mean, certain things cause that emotional outburst in us. But it's how we deal with it, how we live it. That's what makes the difference. We know Jesus got angry. One of my favorite images in my head is when he runs those money changers out of the temple. He turns over tables. In John, he makes a whip out of leather straps. He gets so angry. So we know that being angry isn't part of this unrighteousness, this idea of being in a right relationship with God. Because then he goes on. He says, if you insult someone, then you will be subject to the council, which raising it slightly on accountability. And he says, if you say to someone, you fool, you'll be subject to the fires of hell. See, this is what it's all about. This is what he's talking about when we look at what he says about lust, what he says about not keeping our word to someone, what we find out about when he says about revenge and hatred. All those things that he's going to bring up here in just a few more verses, it's all the same message. He says, when you insult someone, now we've got to realize that our little translation here in English left out an important word. It says when you insult someone. In Greek, it actually says the word raka. And raka, they're not sure of the meaning, but what they've interpreted it as is that you call someone worthless. And then, by the way, I've been translating a lot of these words. The word translated here is fool. Good news. In Hebrew and Greek, it means exactly the same thing that it does to us. When you call somebody a fool, it means you're an empty-headed idiot. You're a moron. Now, don't tell me we've never thought that about somebody. And this is where we get into trouble. See, there's one of my favorite words isn't a Christian word at all. It comes from, it's in the Hindi language. It comes from Hinduism. And you may have heard it if you've ever been to a yoga class. It's the word namaste. You You ever heard that word? And somebody might use that, and they believe, and if you ask somebody from India today, they'll tell you that namaste actually means it's just a greeting. It's a respectful greeting. But in reality, namaste means much more. Namaste means this. When you say namaste to someone, you say, I recognize the divine in you. I recognize that you are made in the image of God. I don't know about you, but the real crime of what Jesus is talking about is when we reduce other human beings by referring to them as worthless, as empty-headed, as some species of animal lower than human beings. When we give them that designation, that's when we get in trouble. When we look at another human being and we think they are worth less than we are, based on whatever criteria we decide, whether we're just angry because they cut us off in traffic or they happen to be a member of a group we don't like, that's the crime. That's the sin. Jesus says it. When we lust for someone else, we reduce that person from no longer being a human being to being an object. When we don't trust somebody to give him our word and keep it, we don't think you're worth us keeping our word to you. You've reduced their humanity. When you decide to get revenge from someone, you want equal payment. I don't care how it affects you. Because you are worthless, Raka. And you are a fool. And in hatred, it's hard to hate someone if we see the same God I love and worship in you. Jesus in this whole section is basically telling us the same thing. When we look at other people, no matter what their actions are, no matter what they say, and for our world today, no matter what side of the aisle they're on, no matter how they voted, no matter what their opinions are of the world, namaste. I see God in you. And that makes us brothers and sisters. Jesus is telling us that that's how we need to live our lives. He's painting a picture of what the perfection looks like. He's painting his picture. Wesley called it being sanctified. Jesus calls it being righteous. It means being perfect in our relationship with God, because when we look at others, we know what it looks like to love our neighbor as ourselves, because we've just looked into a mirror and I see God in you. I see the same Spirit that blesses me every day in your life. And if you're a Christian, you also know that I see a person worth dying for on the cross when I look at you. Jesus did it for me. We like to remember that part. But the part we need to remember, Jesus tells us in these 4 or 5 stories, is that he died for them too. Namaste. See the divine in you. Doesn't mean we have to agree with everybody, but it does mean we don't reduce them to a subhuman figure in our mind. Maybe the next time I get cut off, I won't say, you idiot. You fool, make up your mind. Don't you know how to drive? God's going to slap me and say, I died for that one too. I created that one in my image also. Namaste. That's what I want to think of from now on. I would greet people like that if they didn't think I was crazy. If they didn't think I was trying to convert them to something other than Christianity. But in my mind, when I see someone who dresses differently, who looks differently, who has an opinion different than mine, who may worship in a different form than I do, who has more tattoos than I do, who lived a different childhood than I did, who lives in a different part of the world than I do, Jesus tells us in these stories about anger, lust, trust, hatred, revenge. He tells us, namaste. I see the God in you. You know, we would love as Christians, I think today more than ever, to find some lost scroll of Jesus that addresses the exact problems we have in the church for the 21st century. To give us his actual opinion, specifically about the issues that face the church today. But in reality, he's already done it. He says, forget all that. What matters is that when we look at another human being, regardless of their differences, the church just needs to say, I recognize the divine in you, and you are welcome here. Because I was. Because he was. Because she was. Because Christ welcomes us all. And it's Christ's image that we are striving to live out in the world. The world needs to see some people who believe that God is real enough, who have created us all.